Hello. You know, I have fond memories of the last time I was here, which was, I think the good people of Lafayette were giving the mayor an aneurysm at the time, at the front of the thing. I heard. Congratulations. So I'm just going to talk for a short bit and take off from Cliff's comments about what is environmentalism? What is being an environmentalist? Because I think 20 years ago, when I graduated from law school and began doing environmental law, I would have defined that a lot differently than I define it today. And 20 years ago, I defined it as being an enforcer of the nation's environmental laws. So when we created our firm, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, we thought we could solve most of the problems by simply taking the nation's federal environmental laws and actually enforcing them, because there's so few people today, so few lawyers today on behalf of communities actually enforcing these laws. And I've spoken at length about this before. I'm not going to go ad nauseum into our journey over 8 years about learning how environmental laws in the United States were not what we think that they are. I remember some of my early experiences with things like the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires these environmental impact statements, which were mentioned earlier. And the sad, nasty little thing about environmental impact statements is that the agencies can create an environmental impact statement, but there's no legal requirement for them to choose the most environmentally sound alternative. So you can do an environmental impact statement. It just doesn't matter that you do an environmental impact statement. It makes it public, you know, the concerns and everything, and that's a good thing, raising consciousness, but there's no legal requirement that the agency actually comply with what they've written in the environmental impact statement. So I remember butting heads with agencies saying, you got to put climate change in here. If you're going to put a new road in, you got to put the climate change stuff in here. And then they said, we will, but it doesn't matter. Because we can recognize that the climate change impacts are horrendous, but it doesn't matter because we can move forward with the project anyway. There's a myth, I think, around federal national environmental laws that they actually have teeth of some kind. And the environmental impact statement stuff and the law under which they're required, the National Environmental Policy Act, was just one part of my learning experience about these things aren't worth the paper that they're written on. I mean, they're really not. And the one thing that was extraordinarily missing from those environmental laws was local control. It doesn't matter one whit what communities want in terms of stopping projects when they're proposed for a community. I don't need to sit here and tell you guys this because Colorado is a case study for that. That Longmont and Broomfield and these other places who said we were going to ban fracking, ban oil and gas extraction. And then the COGCC and COGA said, we don't care, because you don't have the power to do it. You don't have the power to ban fracking. And people said, what do you mean we don't have the power? This is a democracy. We live in a democracy. It's our community. It's our municipality. We can make the rules here. Well, no, you can't. It doesn't work that way. And that was the final piece of the thing that broke the camel's back, was learning that in the US today, for the past 150 years, that communities are prohibited from banning those projects which the state or federal government has approved. If the state or federal government has approved a project, you and your municipality have no right to ban it, have no right to prohibit it, barely have rights to better regulate it than what the state and federal government has put into place. So it's like we're all running around like hamsters in a wheel who are living in a giant myth about what this place actually is and how it runs. And I guess the place where that final brick was put into place was when we were doing one of our workshops. I wasn't there, but Ben Price, our national organizing director, was there. The Pine Ridge Reservation, we were talking about how the system of law is set up in the United States to actually keep you in your own communities, your cities, towns, villages, and counties, from actually making any real decisions about anything. That's how the system is set up. And one of the indigenous women from the reservation was in the class, and she looked puzzled. And so Ben called on her and said, you know, do you have a question? Are you wondering about something? And she said, well, I knew how the structure of law applied to us as indigenous communities, but I had no idea this applied as well to white Western communities, that this system of law basically keeps you in a cage, doesn't allow you to touch the major stuff like agribusiness or energy or transportation or those kinds of issues. And then she frowned and she looked back at Ben and she goes, "At least we know we live on a reservation." Right? Right? That we can't see it. I couldn't see it for 8 years. I didn't understand how the law worked. And in working with communities, not big nonprofit organizations, I think there's a lot of common themes that run through this work with people that do it. That's not we didn't work with major nonprofit organizations. In fact, the major nonprofit environmental organizations make a mint off of perfecting the regulatory system, hiring experts and doing permits and then doing the appeals and hiring the lawyers. And the community groups that we began assisting back in 2002 basically become just fundraisers for the lawyers. The lawyers say, okay, well, we're the ones to determine strategies and tactics now, and the best you can do is raise the money to pay us because it's going to be expensive to do these things. And then they tell them that they can win, which is nuts. I mean, that's crazy. You can't win anything under this current system. It's not written for you. It's written for others. It's a script that somebody else has written, and by the time you come to the scene, it's the ninth inning in baseball terms, and your hands are tied behind your back. You're cooked. And so becoming an environmentalist back then, from 1995 to 2001, 2002 for us, meant enforcing the environmental laws. And so we enforced the environmental laws, but it didn't matter. Because a lot of times when we found a punch-through point of some kind, when we were representing a community, we found something that worked, the corporate boys would simply come into the state legislatures and change the law to make sure that nobody else could use what we had found. And it didn't matter. What we were doing didn't matter. It's why we quit doing environmental law. It's why we quit doing regulatory stuff and turned to do something else. And I wanted to spend a good bit of this time talking about what being an environmentalist means to us now, and also to talk about this one big thing, which is disobedience, about being disobedient, right? The need to be disobedient. And you can be disobedient in all kinds of different ways. You can be disobedient individually and sit down in front of the bulldozer. I mean, I've been arrested for civil disobedience or trying to stop a road project in Virginia, and being civilly disobedient in that way. That's extremely important. It's also important to be collectively civilly disobedient, like Lafayette has been, in passing the Community Bill of Rights and the Climate Bill of Rights and Protections. It doesn't matter whether the system tells you can't use your municipality to do this, that, or the other. You do it anyway, because you have to. There's no choice. You can't accept when other people say you can't say no, because we are out of time. This is a crisis moment, and crisis moments call for different kind of activism. It calls for the 3 kids, African-American kids, who sat down at the lunch counter in Greensboro, South Carolina. It takes people like that, because 15 years from now, 20 years from now, people are going to ask you, where were you? What side were you on when this was going on, right? Where were you? That's what they're going to ask. And you got to pick. And it's a real personal decision to pick. And I know a lot of the people in this room have already chosen their sides. But it's time to put bodies on the line. I mean, that's what it's time for. It's collective civil disobedience, communities across the United States like Lafayette, who have begun hijacking their own municipalities to turn it into something that it was never intended to be, because municipalities, cities, towns, villages, and counties in the United States were intended to be mere water carriers for the state, to carry out state administrative policies and other things that the state tells you to do, but they were never intended to be independent, never intended to have the power to say no to oil and gas extraction coming in, never intended to have independent authority. That's the United States as we know it. That's how municipalities are treated. You read the judges' decisions. They say the municipality is a creature of the state. The state can abolish you. In Lafayette, if the state chose tomorrow to eliminate the city of Lafayette, they could do so. There's no legal reason why they can't. You are merely a handmaiden to the state to carry out the state's dictates. And when Longmont and Lafayette and Broomfield and other places begin to act differently than that, to say we're not going to see those bars anymore and we're going to hijack and re-engineer what we're doing because nobody else is stopping oil and gas extraction. When you start doing that, you have to be punished. And the way that you're punished is you get sued. And you get sued by the corporations that are benefiting from what you're trying to stop from going in. And you can get sued for damages and attorney's fees. I got hit for a $52,000 attorney's fees award last year for daring to say that a community should have power to stop a frack wastewater injection well. That same community just got hit with a $103,000 attorney's fees award from the federal judge hearing the case. These are the risks, these are the sacrifices, but it's not a choice not to take them. You have to. It's like these 1,100 people got arrested in London, the Extinction Rebellion people that you're reading about. You know, that's the kind of stuff that has to happen here in the end. And I want to close just with this story about this little place in Pennsylvania, the town of 700 people called Grant Township. A little place called Indiana County, just outside of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. They followed the Lafayette model. They said, we've been proposed for a frack wastewater injection well in this community. For folks who don't know what that is, it means a couple of million gallons of frack wastewater dumped down a hole and then sealed forever. That's what a frack wastewater injection well is. Most of the companies in Pennsylvania, they ship it to Ohio because it's cheaper to ship it to Ohio. But now it's cheaper to dump it where it is. And so they're trying to open up these frack wastewater injection wells in Pennsylvania. This one community, 700 people, said, we're not going to do that. And they passed a Bill of Rights that said we have a right to clean air and clean water and a sustainable waste management system, and we're going to ban frack wastewater injection wells within this community. Well, what happened next? The corporation sued. The corporation that wanted to put the frack wastewater injection well sued into the township. And they sued using these doctrines that have been manufactured over the past 150 years to keep you subordinate to the corporation that wants to come in and do business in your community. And this is not news to you either. It's things like preemption, where the state passes a state law, and the state law preempts your municipality from regulating anything dealing with that issue, like oil and gas. And here in Colorado, it's the Colorado Oil and Gas Act that preempts you from dealing with certain issues. There's a thing called Dillon's rule, which means your municipality is completely subordinate to the state. If the state hasn't given you the power to act, you don't have it by default. You are not a natural democratic entity. The state has to breathe life into you by authorizing you to pass certain laws in certain areas. And if they haven't, you can't. And then there's corporate rights, this beautiful body of law that stretches back 200 years that says corporations are persons under the law, which means that corporations have certain rights they can exercise against your municipality, including suing you for damages caused by laws that you passed that you didn't have the authority to pass in the first place under these doctrines. So this little community in Pennsylvania gets sued. What happens when communities get sued that are 700 people? They fold. It's a wonder why any activism happens in the United States, because when you have a big corporation suing a small municipality and the law is on their side, 200 years worth of law is on their side about corporate power and how it elevates itself above community rights, that the communities flee. They run for the hills. Their elected officials, when threatened with $1 million award or judgment, they repeal the law. They flee the scene like they're escaping a 7-Eleven robbery. They run for the hills because the lawyer says you could go bankrupt. It would be on the receiving end of $2 million, or $3 million, or $10 million, or whatever. And the local elected officials, they run. I've never seen anybody run so fast. The elected officials run. Well, the people in Grant, the elected officials didn't run. And they said, we're going to fight this. And they fought the lawsuit, and they lost. They lost the lawsuit. The federal judge said, you can't pass a Bill of Rights. You can't ban frack wastewater injection wells. It's the law of the state. The corporation has the right to sue you, and they did. And the federal judge overturned their law. So what did the people of Grant do? Well, most people would have gone home at that point. Said, we tried, we fought it in courts, we lost. Now it's time to go home, do other things. Instead, they began a home rule process to write a new local constitution for their community that reinstated what the federal judge had thrown out. Reinstated what the federal judge had thrown out, right? And they pass a new charter for their community, a new constitution. What happens next? They get sued again. And guess who sues them this time? The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Right? The state comes in, which shouldn't be news to you either, because COGCC came in on the Longmont cases. The governor invited them in and sent them in to become part of the case, right? The Department of Environmental Protection sued them. The best quote I've seen in a while is one of the elected officials, Stacy Long, great person, elected official in Great Township. She said, "We have now been sued by the Department of Environmental Protection for actually protecting the environment." And it's not over. They've been hit with an award. They can't pay the award. So what are they going to do? They say, "We're not going to pay a fucking cent to you," the company. They say, "We're going to file for bankruptcy if we have to. But you're not getting a cent of our money. You can shut us down. We're not doing any good anyway. We're a local government. We can't do anything anyway under the law. So why not shut us down?" Right? But it's that kind of disobedience. And who knows, maybe when the trucks begin to roll for the frack wastewater injection well, if it starts getting built, they're out on the roads, they're out on the streets, they're enforcing their own laws. It's time. Some people have said I'm unplugged now because I got hit with this $52,000 attorney's fees award. And now they're trying to take my license. There's a complaint to take my license in Pennsylvania for actually arguing that a community should have the right to say no to a project that harms them when it comes into the blaze. Yeah, exactly. So to me, it's all about that level of disobedience that we're willing to engage in. We spent 15 years proving that the system works a certain way. People still come to us and they say, even on the Colorado stuff, just last week, somebody calls and says, "I read that Longmont lawsuit about, they were sued by the Colorado Oil and Gas Association a number of years ago now, 2013. How is that possible?" I'm like, how is it not? How is it not possible, right? You don't have a corporate entity that has the rights that the system has given it and then expect them not to exercise those rights. You can't expect that in the system. And I understand that some of this stuff sometimes is like, we've been raised that the United States is a certain place, that it's democratic and we have pressure politics, and if enough of us get together to do something, that it sticks. No, it doesn't. I'm here to reinforce that again. It doesn't. And we spent 15 years proving to people who, for some reason, can't get it into their heads how this system is built, that it is built that way. And it's not just Colorado. And it's not just Hawaii, where they passed these GMO bans and then got sued and overridden in the courts. It's not just Ohio, where they've been banning fracking, and the Supreme Court has ruled against them to say, "Sorry, little municipality, you don't have the power to ban these projects, no matter how it's proven that they're harmful to you. You just don't have that power." We are serfs within this system. And we have to break out of that. And the only way to break out of that is to begin to assert that we have a constitutional right as people within our own communities to govern ourselves. It's not a new concept. The United States was built on municipalities, which actually came before the United States. Before there was a United States, there were colonies and municipalities and people actually doing law within those communities. So it's not an unknown concept here, but the courts don't recognize it. To you are still people that the system is afraid of and seeks to control. And the major environmental organizations don't help because they allow themselves to be corralled for whatever power they can assume within the system. And I just want to leave you this quote from your House Speaker. So this is Colorado House Speaker Casey Becker. So she's a Democrat who co-sponsored Senate Bill 181. And when people were asking her, they were saying, "Wow, the Senate Bill 181, it's going to be bad for the oil and gas industry." And she said, quote, "I think in a year we will have more evidence that oil and gas is still thriving under the new law," right? There's no question at all whether communities should have power to ban or the state should ban fracking within Colorado. That's not even a question within this class of people. Their question is only, how are we going to extract it? How are we going to get it out of the ground? And the battle that's fought is either over more regulation or less regulation. But there's no question it's coming out of the ground. There's no question to the folks that run Colorado that eventually all the oil and gas reserves will be extracted from the ground. The only question that they're dealing with is how, right? I tend to think I'm not a how person. I'm a how do we leave it in the ground person. And that conversation is not being had by any of your decision makers in Colorado. That's the difference. So when people say, why is disobedience needed? It's needed because none of your decision makers are talking about how to leave it in the ground. They're talking about how do we extract it, right? And that's a different conversation to have. Thank you.